Hey there, welcome back. I'm here to help you relax tonight. Before we slip into the shadows, like and subscribe to uncover more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where are you listening from and what time is it there. It really brings our community together. Now, dim the lights for that cozy vibe and stick around till the end. Let's dive into the unknown. The donation arrived on a Thursday evening in late October, delivered by a courier service that Eleanor Hartwick had never heard of before. Coastal Express, their van bearing a logo of stylized waves that seemed to shift and curl in the sodium vapor lights of the library's loading dock. The driver was a woman in her 60s, weathered and silent, who required Eleanor's signature on a tablet screen that flickered with interference patterns that might have been dead pixels or something else entirely. 3 wooden crates, each sealed with brass clasps that had oxidized to the color of dried blood, sat in the back of the van like coffins waiting for their occupants. "What estate are these from?" Eleanor asked, her pen hovering over the digital signature line. She was a woman who believed in documentation, in the proper providence of things. At 43, she had spent the better part of 2 decades as the head archivist of the Whitmore Coastal Library, a Gothic revival structure that clung to the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic like a barnacle that had learned architecture. Her hair, once the color of autumn wheat, had begun its slow migration toward gray, and she wore it pulled back in a bun so severe it gave her migraines by the end of most days. But precision had its costs, and Eleanor had never been one to shy away from payment. "The paperwork's in the first crate," the driver said, her voice carrying the rasp of decades of cigarette smoke. "Anonymous donor. Happens more than you'd think. People die, their relatives don't want to deal with the stuff, and it ends up here." Eleanor signed, and the woman drove away without another word, her taillights disappearing into the coastal fog that rolled in from the ocean every evening like clockwork, transforming the world beyond the library's walls into a realm of indistinct shapes and muffled sounds. The fog had been particularly thick this autumn, so dense that the lighthouse 3 miles north had taken to running its horn continuously from dusk until dawn, its mournful call punctuating the nights like the voice of some great wounded beast. She stood on the loading dock for a moment longer than necessary, watching the fog consume the access road, feeling the temperature drop as the marine layers settled over the peninsula. The air tasted of salt and something else, something faintly organic that reminded her of the smell that emanated from opened graves, wet earth, and the sweet rot of things that should have stayed buried. Her hands, already cold despite the cardigan she wore over her blouse, began to tremble slightly. Not from the chill, though that would be the explanation she gave herself later, but from something else. Some primitive warning system buried deep in her hindbrain that recognized danger before her conscious mind could catalog its symptoms. The library proper was closed for the day, its reading rooms dark and empty, save for the emergency exit signs that cast everything in a sickly green glow. Eleanor's footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she used the hand truck to wheel the crates through the building's maze of corridors, past the circulation desk where Mrs. Patricia Delacroix normally held court during business hours, past the children's section with its cheerful murals depicting anthropomorphized animals engaged in various literacy activities, past the microfilm room and the genealogy section and the local history archives until she reached her domain, the basement preservation room where damaged and rare materials came to be cataloged, repaired, and filed away into climate-controlled obscurity. The preservation room was Eleanor's sanctuary, a windowless space lit by full-spectrum fluorescence that hummed with a frequency she could feel in her teeth. She had arranged it with the meticulous care of someone creating a life raft in a hostile sea. Her desk positioned at precise right angles to the work tables, her tools laid out in order of size and function, her reference books shelved according to a system so complex that even her assistant, young Marcus Chen, who came in 3 days a week to help with the more physically demanding aspects of the work, had never quite mastered it. Everything had its place, and everything was in its place. Order imposed on chaos. System imposed on entropy. These were the principles by which Eleanor Hartwick had organized not just her workspace, but her entire existence. She positioned the crates on the examination table and stood looking at them for a long moment, her hands clasped behind her back in the unconscious posture of a museum-goer contemplating an unfamiliar sculpture. The wood was old, perhaps 19th century, and bore the marks of careful craftsmanship. Dovetail joints, hand-planed surfaces, the kind of attention to detail that spoke of a time when objects were made to last generations rather than quarters. The brass clasps, despite their oxidation, functioned smoothly when she tested them, their mechanisms precise and well-maintained. The first crate contained the promised paperwork, a letter from the law firm of Morrison, Sullivan, and Chang, indicating that the materials were being donated per the instructions of their late client, whose identity was protected by attorney-client privilege. There was a brief inventory: personal journals, correspondence, and ephemera spanning approximately 40 years, and a waiver absolving the library of any responsibility for the contents or condition of the materials. Standard boilerplate, the kind of thing Eleanor had processed dozens of times before. But beneath the official documentation was a smaller envelope, cream-colored and expensive, sealed with red wax that had been impressed with what looked like a signet ring bearing the image of an open book with flames rising from its pages. Eleanor's hands were shaking again as she broke the seal. The paper inside was thick and deckled, the handwriting an elegant copperplate that belonged to another era. To the archivist who opens this, "You have been chosen not by chance but by design. The journals contained herein are meant for your eyes alone. Do not catalog them, do not shelve them, do not share their contents with another living soul. Read them in solitude and remember that the past is never truly past. Some debts compound interest across the years, accumulating weight and mass until payment becomes inevitable. You will know why these have come to you." There was no signature, no date, nothing that would allow Eleanor to trace the letter's origin. She read it 3 more times, her analytical mind searching for hidden meanings or coded instructions, but finding only the simple declarative statements and that final haunting line: "You will know why these have come to you." But she didn't know, couldn't know. She had no enemies that she was aware of, had lived a life of such careful mediocrity that the idea of someone targeting her with mysterious journals seemed absurd. She was a librarian, an archivist, a woman who had devoted herself to the preservation and organization of other people's memories, while keeping her own locked away in compartments so secure that even she rarely attempted to access them. The second crate contained the journals themselves. Leather-bound volumes, perhaps 24 of them, their spines unmarked by title or date. Eleanor lifted one out, feeling its weight in her hands, heavier than it should be, as if the pages had absorbed moisture from decades of storage. The leather was soft with age, the color of dried blood or old wine, and when she opened it, the pages released a scent that made her eyes water. Not the pleasant mustiness of old books, but something sharper and more chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with lavender, and underneath it all, that same organic decay she'd smelled outside in the fog. The first page bore a date: September 3rd, 1984. 41 years ago, almost to the day. The handwriting was different from the letter, less elegant, more hurried, the script of someone writing quickly and with urgency. "I have decided to keep this record not for posterity but for justice. There are certain acts that demand documentation. certain crimes that should be preserved not in the official record where they can be sanitized and explained away, but in the private ledger where truth is allowed to exist unvarnished and unrepentant. This is that ledger. This is where the accounting begins. Eleanor found herself sitting down at her desk without consciously deciding to do so. The journal opened before her. Her reading lamp adjusted to cast its light across the yellowing pages. She told herself she would read just a few entries, just enough to determine whether the materials had historical value or were merely the delusional ramblings of someone with too much time and too much paper. Archivists developed a sense for these things, could usually determine within a few minutes whether a donated collection would prove valuable or would end up in the discard pile, to be pulped and recycled into something more useful. But as she began to read, Eleanor felt that primitive warning system activate again, stronger this time, as if her body understood something her mind was still refusing to process. The journal's author wrote about a young woman, brilliant and trusting, who had come to her for help managing a family inheritance. The details were sparse but specific. An amount of money, a series of investment decisions, a gradually dawning realization that something was wrong. The entries were clinical in their recitation of facts, almost bloodless in their refusal to acknowledge the emotional dimensions of what was being described. And then, perhaps 20 pages into the journal, Eleanor read a name, Mary Ann. Her sister's name. Her younger sister who had trusted Eleanor to help invest the inheritance their grandmother had left them both, who had signed power of attorney papers because Eleanor had the financial education and Mary Ann had only had dreams and artistic ambitions. Mary Ann, who had wanted to open a gallery, who had sketched and painted with a talent that made even Eleanor, who had never understood art, who saw beauty as unnecessary ornamentation rather than fundamental truth, recognize something special in her work. Mary Ann, whose life Eleanor had destroyed with such methodical thoroughness that even now, 18 years later, she sometimes woke in the night wondering if her sister was still alive, if she had ever forgiven the unforgivable, if she understood that Eleanor had never meant for things to go so wrong. The journal fell from Eleanor's hands, landing on the desk with a sound like a slap. She stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward to strike the wall behind her. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, the kind that preceded either hyperventilation or a scream. The fluorescent lights seemed suddenly too bright, the room too small, the air too thick with that chemical organic smell that now seemed to be emanating not from the journal, but from everywhere at once, as if the walls themselves were exhaling the scent of old sins. "No," she said aloud, though there was no one to hear her. "This is impossible. This is a coincidence. Common name. Thousands of Mary Anns. Thousands of inheritance disputes means nothing, proves nothing." But even as she spoke, she knew she was lying. Archivists don't believe in coincidence. They believe in patterns, in connections, in the careful accumulation of evidence that eventually resolves into understanding. And the evidence here was beginning to form a pattern that Eleanor's carefully constructed defenses were ill-equipped to withstand. She forced herself to sit back down, to retrieve the journal, to continue reading. The entries that followed detailed what Eleanor already knew, what she had spent 18 years trying to forget. The embezzlement scheme disguised as investment losses, the falsified documents, the way she had siphoned Mary Ann's inheritance into her own accounts while making it look like legitimate but unfortunate financial decisions. The author wrote about it all with the dispassionate precision that somehow made the crimes seem even worse than they were, and they had been terrible enough in reality. By the time Eleanor reached the end of the first journal, her hands were no longer shaking. She had passed beyond shock into something colder and more analytical, that state of dissociation where the mind protects itself by treating trauma as data, horror as information to be cataloged and filed. She reached for the second journal, then the third, working her way through the pile with the same methodical efficiency she brought to all her archival work. Each journal covered a different case, a different victim, a different crime. But they all shared certain characteristics. The crimes were financial in nature. They involved betrayals of trust by family members or close associates. And in each case, the perpetrator had escaped legal consequences through careful planning and social privilege. Eleanor recognized some of the names. Prominent families in the region, old money that had insulated itself from accountability through lawyers and connections, and the simple fact of their accumulated power. And, in each case, the journal's author had documented not just the crime itself, but its aftermath. The ruined lives, the suicides, the descents into poverty and addiction and despair. The author had tracked these consequences with the dedication of a naturalist studying the life cycle of a particularly toxic insect, noting each development with timestamps and corroborating evidence. It was the fourth journal that broke through Eleanor's analytical armor. This one was different from the others. The handwriting had changed, becoming looser and more erratic, and the entries were interspersed with sketches, drawings of faces, buildings, objects. And there, on page 47, was a drawing that made Eleanor's stomach clench with recognition. Her sister's gallery, the one Marianne had dreamed of opening, rendered in pen and ink with such careful attention to detail that Eleanor could almost see the paintings on the walls, the sculpture in the corner, the sign above the door that read, Hartwick and Hartwick Fine Arts. The gallery that never was, the caption read. The dream that died because trust proved cheaper than conscience. Beneath the drawing was a longer entry, different in tone from the clinical documentation that had characterized the other journals. I met Marianne Hartwick today. She's living in a subsidized apartment in Portland now, working 3 jobs to make rent. The arthritis in her hands has progressed to the point where she can no longer paint or draw with any precision. She told me she hasn't picked up a brush in 5 years. When I asked her if she blamed her sister, she said something I found remarkable. Eleanor didn't steal my money. She stole my faith in the world. The money would have run out eventually anyway, but the belief that people you love wouldn't destroy you, that was supposed to last forever. Eleanor stood again, moved away from the desk as if physical distance might shield her from the words she'd just read. But the preservation room, which had always felt like a fortress against the chaos of the outside world, now seemed to be closing in around her. The walls appeared to be leaning inward, the ceiling pressing down, the fluorescents humming with a frequency that was no longer merely annoying, but actively hostile, as if the building itself had turned against her. She checked her watch, 9:47 p.m. She had been reading for nearly 3 hours, though it felt like both longer and shorter than that. Time had acquired a strange elasticity, stretching and compressing in ways that made her question whether she was still operating in normal causality or had somehow slipped into that dreamlike state where past and present collapsed into a single eternal moment. The logical thing would be to leave, to go home, to sleep, to return in the morning when the world was bright and rational and the journals would reveal themselves to be nothing more than an elaborate prank or the work of someone who had confused fiction with reality. But Eleanor had never been good at walking away from problems, had built her entire life around the principle that difficulties should be confronted head-on and solved through application of systematic methodology. She returned to the desk and opened the 5th journal. This one began with her name, Eleanor Hartwick, born July 12, 1982, Whitmore, Maine. Current occupation, head archivist, Whitmore Coastal Library. Unmarried, childless, friendless. A life lived in the negative spaces between other people's stories. The description that followed was so precise in its details, so intimate in its knowledge of Eleanor's habits and routines, that she felt violated in a way that went beyond mere invasion of privacy. The author knew about her morning routine, the tea she drank, Earl Grey, no milk, 1 sugar. The route she walked to work, always the same, timing her departure so she would arrive at the library exactly 7 minutes before opening. The apartment she rented, 3rd floor, corner unit, facing away from the ocean because the sound of waves at night had always made her anxious. But more disturbing than the external details were the internal ones. The author seemed to have access to Eleanor's thoughts, her memories, the carefully guarded recollections she had never shared with anyone. There were passages describing her childhood with Marianne, the complicated dynamics of being the responsible older sister paired with the creative younger one, the resentment that had built over years of watching their parents lavish attention on Marianne's talents while taking Eleanor's competence for granted. She told herself it was about fairness, one entry read, that Marianne had already received so much, the love, the attention, the acknowledgement of her gifts, that it was only reasonable for Eleanor to claim what was hers by right. The inheritance was just money after all, and money was meant to be used, to be leveraged, to be transformed into something more valuable than the raw material it started as. Eleanor had plans. Eleanor had ambitions. And unlike Marianne's artistic dreams, Eleanor's ambitions were practical, achievable, rooted in the real world rather than fantasies of creative fulfillment. What Eleanor didn't realize, or chose not to realize, was that she wasn't stealing money. She was stealing possibility. Every dollar she diverted was a year of Marianne's life, a painting that would never be created, a dream that would wither before it could bloom. The mathematics of embezzlement are simple: debits and credits, assets and liabilities. But the mathematics of destruction are more complex, calculating not in currency but in futures foreclosed, in potential that never actualizes, in the slow death of hope measured out over decades. Eleanor wanted to stop reading, wanted to burn the journals right then and there, to reduce them to ash and scatter them into the fog where they could do no more harm. But she couldn't stop. It was as if the journals had developed their own gravity, pulling her deeper into their pages with each word she read. The entries were no longer just descriptions of her crime. They were becoming something else, something that felt less like documentation and more like conjuration. The 6th journal began. The library after dark is a different world. The daytime patrons, the students and researchers, the genealogy enthusiasts and local history buffs retreat with the sun, leaving behind only the permanent residents, the memories and secrets that have been cataloged and filed and locked away in the building's deeper chambers. Eleanor Hartwick believes she is the library's keeper, but she is merely another artifact waiting to be properly classified. A sound from somewhere above her made Eleanor freeze. A footstep, perhaps, or the settling of old wood adjusting to the temperature differential between day and night. She listened. Her breath held, but the sound didn't repeat. Still, she found herself looking toward the preservation room's door, which she had locked upon entering as she always did when working late. The lock was engaged, the deadbolt thrown. No one could enter without her hearing them first. But the sound came again, and this time Eleanor recognized it for what it was. Pages turning. Not in the journals before her, but somewhere else in the building. The dry whisper of paper against paper, amplified by the library's acoustic properties into something that sounded almost like breathing. She stood and moved to the door, pressing her ear against its surface. The sound was clearer now, and with it came another element. A voice, too faint to make out words, but distinct enough to register as human. Someone was in the library, Someone was reading aloud in one of the rooms above her. Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythm that seemed to echo the lighthouse horn in the distance. The emergency lights painted everything in that sickly green, transforming the familiar hallways into something alien and hostile. She made her way toward the main stairwell, moving slowly, each footstep carefully placed to minimize sound. The voice grew clearer as she climbed, a woman's voice, reading with the measured cadence of someone working through unfamiliar text. Eleanor reached the first floor and followed the sound to the reading room, the library's central chamber with its vaulted ceiling and tall windows that looked out onto the fog-shrouded grounds. The room was empty. But the voice continued, and Eleanor realized with a chill that ran from the base of her skull to the small of her back that it was coming from everywhere and nowhere, as if the building itself had learned to speak. The words resolved into clarity. September 15th, 2007. Eleanor Hartwick made her final withdrawal today, the last of Marianne's inheritance, converted into cashier's checks that cannot be traced or reversed. She has been meticulous in her theft, leaving a paper trail that suggests incompetence rather than malice, bad luck rather than bad faith. She will never be charged. She will never face legal consequences. The law, like most human institutions, is better at punishing the desperate than the calculating. "Stop," Eleanor whispered, though she knew the voice wouldn't obey. Couldn't obey because it wasn't really coming from outside her. The voice was her own, she realized, her own voice reading her own crimes back to her from journals that seemed to exist in some space between memory and reality, between documentation and haunting. She fled back to the preservation room, locking the door behind her with shaking hands. But the voice followed her, seeping through the walls like water through cracks, growing louder and more insistent with each word. And now there were other sounds joining it. The rustle of pages turning in the crates she hadn't yet opened, the scratch of pen on paper, the whisper of voices that might have been the wind but weren't, couldn't be, because the preservation room had no windows, and the ventilation system had been shut off hours ago. Eleanor returned to the journals on her desk and found that they had rearranged themselves while she was upstairs. The one that now lay open showed a page she hadn't read yet, though she had worked her way through 6 of the volumes. This entry was dated today, October 24th, 2025. The archivist sits in her fortress of controlled atmosphere and organized knowledge, believing that systems and protocols can protect her from consequence. But preservation works both ways. What she has tried to bury has been perfectly preserved, maintained in the ideal conditions for long-term storage, waiting for the moment when it would be retrieved and put back into circulation. Tonight is that moment. Tonight, the archive becomes a mirror, and what Eleanor Hartwick sees reflected there is not the careful professional she has constructed over 18 years, but the woman she was and remains, the thief, the betrayer, the sister who valued money over love. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. Eleanor could see her breath now, small clouds of condensation that vanished as quickly as they formed. The smell of decay and formaldehyde was so strong it made her gag, and underneath it all was something else. The scent of burnt paper, as if somewhere nearby a fire was consuming pages one by one. She grabbed the journal and hurled it across the room, watching it strike the far wall and fall open, its pages splaying like broken wings. But the action brought no relief. The remaining journals began to vibrate, a low thrumming that she felt in her bones, and then they started to open themselves, pages turning with increasing speed until they were just blurs of paper and ink. Words began to appear on the walls, not written, but somehow manifesting through the paint itself, dark stains that formed letters and sentences. Accountant, thief, sister, destroyer, keeper of records, falsifier of documents, curator of lies. Eleanor backed away until she hit her desk, her hands scrabbling for purchase on its surface. Her carefully organized tools scattered, falling to the floor with metallic clatters that seemed too loud, too final. She tried to speak, to scream, but found her throat had closed, her voice trapped behind the weight of 18 years of guilt that had finally accumulated enough mass to become physical, to transform from abstract regret into concrete horror. The journals began to rise from the desk, levitating in defiance of gravity, their pages still turning so rapidly they generated a wind that whipped Eleanor's hair loose from its severe bun and sent papers flying around the room in a cyclone of documentation. And in the center of this maelstrom, a figure was forming. Not solid, but not quite transparent either. A presence constructed from shadow and guilt, and the accumulated weight of consequences too long deferred. The figure had Marianne's face, or rather, it had the face Marianne would have had if life hadn't hollowed her out, if Eleanor's betrayal hadn't stolen her future. This was Marianne as she should have been, confident, creative, whole. Her hands were unmarred by arthritis, her eyes bright with the fire of someone engaged in meaningful work. She wore paint-stained jeans and a comfortable sweater, the uniform of an artist in her prime. "Hello, Eleanor," the figure said, and its voice was Marianne's voice, but also the voice that had been reading throughout the library, but also, somehow, Eleanor's own voice, as if all three had merged into a single instrument of accusation and judgment. Eleanor found her voice finally, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You're not real. You're guilt. Conscience. My mind constructing scenarios because I'm exhausted, and I've been reading disturbing material. This isn't happening. Isn't it?" The figure moved closer, and with each step the temperature dropped further, until Eleanor's breath was freezing in the air, forming tiny ice crystals that drifted down like snow. "You've always been good at telling yourself stories about what is and isn't real. That's how you justified taking my money, by reframing theft as prudent financial management. That's how you've lived with yourself for 18 years, by telling yourself that I probably would have failed anyway, that the gallery was a pipe dream, that you were doing me a favor by preventing me from wasting our grandmother's money on artistic ambitions that would never pay off." "I didn't mean," Eleanor started, but the figure cut her off with a gesture. "You meant exactly what you did. That's the thing about methodical cruelty, Eleanor. It requires intention, planning, sustained effort. You can't accidentally embezzle someone's inheritance. You can't accidentally falsify documents. You can't accidentally destroy someone's life while building your own on the ruins." The journals had stopped spinning but remained suspended in the air, arranged in a circle around Eleanor like spectators at an execution. Their pages were all open to the same entry, and Eleanor found herself reading despite her fear. The final accounting. What was taken? $247,000 in cash and investments. What was destroyed? One gallery, one career, one relationship, one future. What was gained? Nothing that could not have been earned through honest work. What was lost? Everything that makes a life worth living. "I've thought about you every day," Eleanor said, surprised to find tears running down her face. She hadn't cried in years, had trained herself out of the habit as she'd trained herself out of so many other inconvenient human responses. "I've wanted to find you, to apologize, to make it right somehow. But you didn't, because making it right would have required admitting what you did. It would have meant losing your job, your reputation, your carefully constructed life, and those things were always more important to you than I was. That's not fair." "Fair?" The figure laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "You're going to talk to me about fairness. You who stole not just money but years. You who took the inheritance our grandmother left specifically for me to pursue my art and used it to make your own life more comfortable? Tell me, Eleanor, what did you buy with my future, this job, this apartment, this sterile, lonely existence you call a life?" Eleanor couldn't answer because the truth was too terrible to speak aloud. She had bought nothing with Marianne's inheritance except the illusion of success, the appearance of financial stability that had helped her secure this position at the library. The money itself was long gone, spent on student loan payments and rent deposits and car repairs and all the other mundane expenses that accumulated over years. She had destroyed her sister's dreams for nothing more than the temporary relief of not being quite so poor, quite so desperate, quite so aware of her own mediocrity. The journals, Eleanor managed. Who wrote them? Who sent them? Does it matter? Would it change anything if I told you they were written by a private investigator I hired, or a journalist researching financial crimes, or your own guilty conscience given physical form? The facts are the same regardless of who documented them. The crimes are the same. The consequences are the same. What do you want from me? The figure smiled, and it was the saddest expression Eleanor had ever seen. What I wanted was a sister. What I want now is for you to understand what you took. Not the money. Money's just numbers, just abstract representations of value, but the rest of it. The confidence to believe that people you love won't destroy you. The faith that the world contains more good than evil. The ability to create without fear that someone will steal what you make. Those are the things you stole, Eleanor. Those are the debts that don't show up in any ledger. The journals began to descend, settling back onto the desk with the gentle precision of snow landing on a windowsill. The figure was fading now, becoming more transparent with each moment, as if whatever energy had allowed it to manifest was finally exhausting itself. "Burn them," it said, its voice growing fainter. "Burn the journals. Destroy the evidence. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Making inconvenient truths disappear. But remember that fire transforms rather than erases. Ashes have their own permanence, their own way of marking the world." And then it was gone, and Eleanor was alone in the preservation room with the journals and the dying echo of her sister's voice, and the terrible understanding that some acts of destruction cannot be undone no matter how much time passes or how carefully they're hidden. She gathered the journals methodically, stacking them in one of the empty crates with the same care she would give to any archival material being prepared for storage or disposal. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing had normalized. She had passed through terror into that state of cold clarity that sometimes comes when the worst has finally happened and there's nothing left to fear. There was an incinerator in the library's basement, installed decades ago when the building had heated itself with coal and maintained for the disposal of damaged materials, too contaminated with mold or vermin to be salvaged. Eleanor had used it perhaps 3 times in her tenure, always with reluctance because destruction went against every instinct that had drawn her to archival work. But tonight, destruction felt not like defeat, but like necessity. She carried the crate down the stairs to the sub-basement, a level that hadn't been renovated since the 1950s and still retained the institutional grimness of that era. The incinerator was a massive iron structure that had been retrofitted to burn natural gas rather than coal, its door secured with a lever that took all of Eleanor's strength to throw. She fed the journals into the flames one by one, watching as the pages curled and blackened, as the careful handwriting disappeared into ash. The fire burned hot and clean, consuming 18 years of documented guilt with the same indifference with which it would consume any other combustible material. There was no drama to it, no supernatural resistance, no sense that she was destroying anything more significant than old paper and leather and ink. When the last journal had been consumed, Eleanor closed the incinerator door and stood watching through its viewing port as the remaining ashes settled and cooled. She felt empty in a way that went beyond exhaustion, as if the fire had burned something out of her along with the journals. Catharsis, perhaps, though that seemed too simple a word for what she'd experienced. Reckoning, maybe. A final accounting of debts that had compounded over years into something that could no longer be ignored or rationalized away. She returned to the preservation room to find it exactly as it had been before the journals arrived. Her tools back in their places, her desk organized with geometric precision, the temperature and humidity at optimal levels. She sat at her desk and composed an email to the law firm that had sent the donation, requesting information about the anonymous donor. She would probably receive no answer. Attorney-client privilege would prevent them from disclosing the details, but she needed to make the attempt, to follow the proper procedures even when she suspected they would lead nowhere. At 3:47 a.m., Eleanor finally left the library, locking the preservation room door behind her and making her way through the building's maze of corridors to the main entrance. The fog had lifted slightly, though the world beyond the library's walls remained indistinct and dreamlike. The lighthouse horn had fallen silent, its warning no longer needed now that the worst of the fog had passed. She drove home through empty streets, her hands steady on the wheel, her mind already beginning the process of compartmentalization that had allowed her to survive 18 years of guilt. By the time she pulled into her apartment building's parking lot, she had almost convinced herself that the entire evening had been a stress-induced hallucination, that the journals had been nothing more than the work of a disturbed individual who had somehow learned details about her past and constructed an elaborate punishment that had ultimately proven to be nothing but smoke and shadows. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning. The breakfast dishes washed and put away, the bed made with hospital corners, the living room arranged with the same precision she brought to her work. She went to the bathroom to brush her teeth and wash her face, performing her nightly routine with mechanical precision. It was when she looked up from the sink that she saw it. The mirror above the vanity no longer showed her reflection. Instead, it showed a room she'd never seen before, or rather, a room she'd seen only in Marianne's drawings. The gallery that should have been rendered in perfect detail. The walls were hung with paintings. Her sister's work, she recognized the style immediately. Each one a masterpiece of color and light and emotional depth. Sculptures occupied the corners, furniture arranged to create intimate spaces for contemplation. Track lighting highlighting the work with museum-quality precision. And in the center of the gallery, standing before a particular painting that showed two sisters as children playing by the ocean, was Marianne herself. Not the hollowed-out version that Eleanor had glimpsed in photographs over the years, but the woman she should have been. Healthy, confident, surrounded by the life she should have lived. As Eleanor watched, paralyzed by horror and longing in equal measure, Marianne turned and looked directly at her, meeting her eyes across the impossible boundary between reality and reflection. Her sister's lips moved, forming words that Eleanor couldn't hear but understood anyway. "This is what you stole. Remember it. Remember it always." Then the image began to change. The paintings on the walls started to darken and crack, their subjects twisting into nightmarish parodies of their original forms. The sculptures began to crumble, collapsing into piles of dust and broken stone. The gallery itself started to decay, paint peeling from the walls, floorboards warping and splitting, until what had been a space of beauty and creation became a monument to loss and destruction. Marianne remained at the center of the transformation, her expression unchanged, her eyes still locked on Eleanor's. As the gallery disintegrated around her, she began to fade, becoming more transparent with each moment until Eleanor could see through her to the ruined space beyond. But she didn't disappear completely. Instead, she remained as a kind of ghost or afterimage, a permanent reminder of possibility foreclosed and futures destroyed. Eleanor tried to look away, to break her gaze from the mirror, but found herself unable to move. She stood frozen, watching as the scene in the glass continued to evolve. The ruined gallery began to fill with ash, rising from the floor like reverse snow, until it covered everything in a layer of gray-white powder. The ash seemed to have weight and substance, bending the broken furniture and bowing the cracked paintings further toward the floor. And then, as Eleanor watched in growing horror, the ash began to move, swirling and coalescing into shapes that became increasingly familiar. Her own face emerged from the gray powder, dozens of iterations of Eleanor Hartwick staring back at her from the mirror's depths. But these were not reflections, they were accusations. Each face showed a different moment from the years of her betrayal. Eleanor forging Marianne's signature on investment documents, Eleanor withdrawing funds from accounts she had no right to access, Eleanor lying to their grandmother about how the money was being used, Eleanor reading the email from Marianne begging for help and choosing not to respond. The ash Eleanors pressed against the surface of the mirror from the inside, their mouths moving in silent screams or perhaps accusations. Their hands left prints on the glass that didn't fade, building up layer after layer until the entire mirror was covered with overlapping handprints that looked like nothing so much as the marks left by drowning victims clawing at ice from beneath. Finally, Eleanor found the strength to move. She stumbled backward, away from the mirror, and in her haste struck the towel rack hard enough to bruise her hip. The pain was sharp and immediate, a welcome anchor to the physical world that allowed her to tear her gaze away from the impossible vision in the glass. She fled the bathroom, slamming the door behind her, and made her way to the living room where she collapsed onto the couch. Her entire body was shaking now, not with fear but with the bone-deep exhaustion that comes after sustained terror. She pulled an afghan around her shoulders and sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the building settling, the distant traffic, the ordinary noises of a world that remained stubbornly normal despite what she had witnessed. Hours passed. Eleanor didn't sleep, but entered instead a state of half-consciousness where memory and imagination blurred together. She saw Marianne as she'd been before the theft, full of life and ambition, and that particular intensity that marked truly creative people. She saw herself as she'd been then too, envious and desperate and willing to justify any action in service of what she'd convinced herself was fairness rather than cruelty. When dawn finally broke, painting the living room walls with weak, gray light, Eleanor stood and made her way back to the bathroom. The mirror now showed only her own reflection, though something about it seemed wrong in ways she couldn't immediately identify. It took her several moments to realize what had changed. The reflection was showing not just her current self, but layers beneath. Her younger self. The woman she'd been 18 years ago, visible through the surface like a painting that had been overpainted but not quite successfully obscured. She leaned closer, studying her reflection's eyes, and saw in them something that made her gasp. The ash from the burned journals was there, somehow, impossibly, visible in her irises like tiny gray flecks suspended in liquid. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, looked again, but the ash remained, a permanent marker of what she had destroyed and what had been destroyed in turn. Eleanor Hartwick went to work that day, and the next, and the day after that. She performed her duties with the same meticulous care she had always brought to her position, cataloging donations and preserving fragile materials, and maintaining the systems that kept the library's collections safe from decay. But every time she passed a mirror or caught her reflection in a window, she saw the ash in her eyes, saw the layers of her former self visible beneath her current presentation, saw the evidence of her crimes written on her own face in letters that only she could read. And sometimes, late at night when she was alone in the preservation room, she would hear pages turning in empty corridors, would smell that mixture of formaldehyde and lavender and decay, would sense a presence watching her from just beyond the edge of her vision. She never saw the figure again, never heard Marianne's voice speaking directly to her. But she knew they were there, permanent residents of the space she had tried to make into a sanctuary from consequence and judgment. The law firm never responded to her inquiry about the journal's origin. The courier company whose name had been on the van turned out not to exist. Eleanor searched for evidence that any of it had been real, receipt of delivery, paperwork, anything that would prove she hadn't imagined the entire episode. But she found nothing. The preservation room security log showed no deliveries that Thursday evening. The loading dock's cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned for exactly the period when the crates should have arrived. It would be easy, Eleanor sometimes thought, to dismiss the entire experience as hallucination or breakdown, or the product of guilt and exhaustion combining into something that felt real but wasn't. And there were days when she almost convinced herself of this interpretation, when the memory of that night took on the hazy quality of a particularly vivid dream. But then she would look in a mirror and see the ash in her eyes, would catch the scent of burning paper when no one else could smell it, would see her reflection showing not just who she was, but who she had been and what she had done. And she would know, with the certainty that comes from direct experience rather than logical deduction, that some debts cannot be destroyed even when their documentation burns. That guilt preserved in the right conditions can achieve a kind of permanence that survives any attempt at erasure. That the past is never truly past but remains always present, waiting in the archives of memory to be retrieved and examined and forced into the light. Eleanor Hartwick continued to work at the Whitmore Coastal Library for another 17 years. She never married, never formed close friendships, never attempted to contact Marianne. She lived alone in her corner apartment, maintaining her routines with the same precision she brought to her professional duties. And every night before turning off the lights, she would stand before her bathroom mirror and study her reflection, watching as the ash in her eyes seemed to shift and swirl like snow in a paperweight, a permanent reminder that some conflagrations leave marks that no amount of time or distance can erase. The library, for its part, remained the same. A Gothic structure clinging to the cliffs, a repository of other people's memories and secrets, a place where the past was carefully preserved for a future that might never come. And in its deepest chamber, in the preservation room that Eleanor Hartwick had made into her sanctuary and her prison, the scent of burning paper lingered long after any physical trace of the journals had disappeared, a ghost of documentation haunting the spaces between the shelves. Some debts, Eleanor learned, compound interest not in currency but in consequence. Some archives preserve not just what was, but what should have been. And some reflections show not merely surface, but depth, layers upon layers of choices and crimes that no amount of burning can reduce to ash. The past remains, permanent and immutable, waiting in the mirror for the moment when we finally have the courage to look directly at what we've become and understand the full cost of what we've destroyed. In the end, Eleanor Hartwick achieved the one thing she'd always claimed to value above all others: perfect preservation. Not of the library's collections, though those remained impeccably maintained, but of her own guilt, kept in ideal conditions where it would never decay or fade, where it would remain fresh and vivid and absolutely present for all the years remaining to her. A permanent record of theft and betrayal and consequence, cataloged and filed and stored in the archives of her own reflection, waiting to be retrieved each time she dared to look. Here's the wrap for now, until we meet again. If this tale kept you on edge, like and share it with a friend who dares to listen, and subscribe for more eerie nights like this one. Thanks for unwinding with me. Sleep tight if you can.